I'm Tom Francis, and this is Next Up to the Mic, where we go back into the archives and feature the poets, writers, and spoken word artists that have performed at regional literary and arts events over the years. On this 17th episode of the podcast, we welcome Carol Graser, who is our guest at the Albany Poets Presents reading at Restaurant Navona in Albany, New York on February 21st, 2018. Carol Graser hosts a poetry reading series in Saratoga Spring's legendary Caffe Lena on the first Wednesday of every month, and has performed her work at various events and venues around New York State. Her work has been published in many literary journals, recently Devilfish Review, Punch Drunk Press, Trailer Park Quarterly, and Minute Magazine. She's the author of the poetry collection The Wind Twists of Their Stems, published by Foothills Publishing in 2007. Please welcome, next up to the mic, Carol Graser.
I'm gonna start with a poem. I have dreams, like poetry dreams, where I have to go to, like, I'm at a reading and I don't have any of my poems and I can't remember any of my poems. And then this was what actually came from a dream where I was like at in a workshop, like with a professor, and it was like a whiny kind of poem, like, oh, poor me. But I got a nice poem out of it, so. This is called Poem Read in a Dream. The poem is written inside the round shape of a Valentine heart that is lying on its side, base like pointed feet to the right. The words are placed in 4 clusters in atriums and ventricles, like blood cells, pumped in and out of veins and arteries, delivering vital air, taking away unease. So this is a wedding poem that I wrote for my son's wedding, which they asked me to write, which was very nice, and then they didn't read it before the wedding. They trusted me to read it. That's my badge of honor as and a mother-in-law too. Dissolving the distance between you. Pour water over the deeply frozen earth. Skate deftly across the divide. Boil maple sap in the open air. The aroma a soft lure. Aim your arrows at flocks of words spoken but not meant. Follow the path of strewn feathers. Measure the gulf between you with an inaccurate ruler, one that shifts scale between atoms and stars. Nap in the full sun. Let the sprouting grass rise through your bones. Wake up side by side. Collect pebbles. The close attention to ground will bring you to the same stone. Talk to the wind, forget what you're looking for, touch the petals of flowers with no thought for a vase, give up ever arriving at the door. It's the black crow intoning from a seed of dream. That's the syllable that will save you. And that's inspired by years of being married to Jeffrey Halpern. And let's give him a round for being a poetry husband. And this one is the haiku. I was working in a tiny used bookstore for a little while, and it was always startling how little people looked at the poetry section. And when they did, it was always they would buy, Walt Whitman or John Frost, Robert Frost. So this is how the haiku felt in that situation. The haiku realized several syllables later that weather patterns had changed, that she was wearing a bikini over goose-pimpled skin. In a cold blast of starting over, she grabbed a run-on sentence out of a 5-page essay on the Industrial Revolution, wrapped it scarf-wise around her neck. She knitted a thick dress out of lines unraveled from random Wikipedia entries. The loop and bind of woolly facts kept her free from artistic drafts. She plucked a hat from the local section of her daily newspaper, let assaults and drug busts insulate her scalp. She fashioned boots that looked exactly as if they were durable from volumes in Walmart's book aisle, laced them tightly to the soles of her mud-stained feet. She started eating pizza in front of the TV. No more baby salad greens drifting gently onto her plate. She took to sleeping late and avoiding mountains. She kept in touch with her sister haikus, listened to their short bursts on waterfalls and birds, but took no joy in those conversations. She longed for work that was fleshed out, something how-to or hilarious, something unputdownable or authoritative and vast in scope. She started watching sunsets while eating ice cream and weighing her options. A cookbook occurred to her during one fiery orange display. A cookbook, she considered, is something to drip batter on, leave open to the heartbreak of unpredictable grease. A cookbook, she thought, setting down her bowl and licking her spoon, with lazy, rambling directions, recipes with 17 ingredients each. Yeah. This is another bookstore-inspired job. When I worked at the bookstore in Saratoga, in Congress Park on a lunch break from a job in retail. Hundreds of white clover are flowering with purpose. Each small head jiggles in the breeze, and I tell them about the patch of violets I mow around each summer that is wider every spring. I tell them, because they're listening, about the manager and her imperious clothes, about her assistant who picks at her loose threads, drapes them like a veil over his dusty head. They tell me in their chirping voices to hold that patch of violets close to me, the eloquent purple, those heart-shaped leaves. But the owner, I shriek, he travels to Tibet to meditate on his choice of good fortune. Their green voices ripple with tiny urgency. Our thin roots listen when the cold stone speaks. The breeze picks up, ruffling their spiky petals. Let the hair on your skin listen now. I have to work on my white clover voice. I don't really have a voice for them. All right, Ghost of Ambitions. I don't have an intro for this one. It is actually, well, this is kind of, it's going to be a question and answer afterwards. So this is my, Ars Poetica type poem, in a way. You come visiting through the black air. My table pushed against the window, you sit across. You bob the licorice tea bag in your bone china cup. I can't see your face, but hear you breathe, your steamy exhale. The moon has lit the field, but the forest that surrounds remains dark. You're crowding me. You've pushed me to an edge. My womb cringes. You pound this broken table with an ugly bang. You keep me from sleep when all I want is blithe surrender. Do you think of my unanswered letters? Do you care that the mailbox leaning by my frozen road is stuffed with disinterest? You don't listen, but rise and toss me in the snow. And go ahead. Don't let me interrupt. That was published by Trailer Park Quarterly. Yeah. And this is I've taken a couple workshops with Bernadette Mayer, so I have a couple of her inspired poems in here. This was from a prompt, write a poem that's a TV pitch. So to prepare, I read the pitch for The Wire. I read a couple of information about that. So what if Emily Dickinson's rise to poetic stardom was a reality TV show? Think a Victorian house with staid, heavily placed furniture. A white figure wisps across a distant hallway, cut to a bee hovering studiously over a patch of red clover. Characters will include an absolute silence, a wind, sometimes soft, sometimes wailing, death, and a rotating cast of flowers and insects. Emily herself stipulates we can only film her in passing. Each confessional is a poem, ink spreading on paper, abandoned in random spots, discovered by the camera lying amid, say, the debris of a finished breakfast. And so these next couple of poems are about my mother, who died a year and a half ago. They're long, but it was nice being able to take care of her towards the end a little bit. And these are not particularly nice poems. The first one was written a long time, previously before she was sick. It's called The Ironing Board, and it's not directly about her. The ironing board hasn't left the closet in years. She sneezes at her own dust, clatters on to the damp mop about the old basement laundry, the joys of never being collapsed. I used to hold things, she says. She goes on about the iron and that tricky heat. The ashtray, the cigarettes with their smooth spirals of smoke, the Diet Pepsi always tinkling the ice. The ironing board was essential and sturdy in her time. Her crossed T legs held up countless indeterminate moments. Every day she stood in front of that washer and dryer like exact proof of a mother. Now she's given up her dream of a new wardrobe of linen shirts. She makes a dash for it one spring cleaning afternoon, lets her sturdy legs take her on a giddy, hobbling flight. No one hears from her for months. There's an uncomfortable hope that she's made it to the edge of town, has found some peace or repurpose at the city dump. She turns up eventually in the park, feeding chunks of bread to intransient ducks. I miss the cigarettes, she says to a mallard, and the Pepsi and the melting ice. She leans back against the sun-warmed bench. The iron was kind of a bastard, she breathes, folding and unfolding her legs. So this one I wrote after she died. This is sort of when, especially the first year after someone dies, the sort of past and present happen at the same time, and then the holidays are always, everything comes up for that. So this is also a piantum. So it kind of fit for the mood of things, repeating and stuff. No one's seen you since that long night in the hospital, but it's the holidays, and every year we gather. Arriving at your door in the buoyant boat of our flu vaccinations, you greet us and in the moment can't muster interest. Arriving at your door in the barnacled boat of our good intentions, you hug each of us and in the moment can't muster interest. You're shrinking and I'm taller. With good intentions, you hug each of us, then separate, stand with arms dangling. You're disappearing and I'm solid. I pull a green seedling from your quiet throat. We stand separate, our arms dangling, but Jell-O parfaits won't make themselves. I pull a green seedling from your quiet throat, adorn the table with ornate words of joy. Jell-O parfaits won't eat themselves, and the clatter of dinner rages around a table adorned with ornate words of joy. We're nourished with no memory of eating. The clatter of dinner fades out. Nothing's left but stones to scour and arrange. We're nourished with no memory of eating, and when we say our goodbyes, you're missing. Leftover stones have been scoured and arranged. I'll visit and kneel at that sculpture like a grave. When I say my goodbyes, you're missing. I cradle these raw, tender roots every winter. Thank you. And this is my political poem, because I've been somewhat unable to speak. I know. So listen to this, and I have one that I'm editing. That's basically the rough version is like, fuck Trump, fuck the patriarchy, fuck capitalism. But I'm working on. It's basically just that over and over right now. This is called the Lancipore. If the Lancipore is vociferous, let me wind that note as crashing loud and wide as any hurricane ever. If yelling the amhilt of my Doothwain pulls a single vein from the body of miscreantness, I have songs for the vociferous stage. To let out the pus of the Lancipore, to punt bubbles from one season to the next. The late September sun is heating the corner of my net spar. My bloma is swising up in torsion. Where is the rock and bone of plants? While the worst holds the gem dig on overfed shoulders, while we aim at knocking it off, while that sea of bodies stretches on for generations and pulses and breathes. So that came from a Bernadette Mayer assignment of writing a poem with made-up words. So I used the made-up words so I could sort of just like express the emotion that I wasn't able with the political stuff. And so I took that, I don't know. I thought that's the first time I've read that out. It was kind of fun to read it out in front of a group. This next poem is called The Appendix, which is I had my appendix out, and it was a deeply emotional experience. I still have like the phantom, I feel like it's still there. Still miss it. Yeah. You're like, what's that pain? Oh, it's where my appendix was. The appendix believed she was part of the large intestine. She didn't have an origin story. At digestive tract meetings, she dangled silently. Sometimes they forgot to leave her a chair. She had ideas for departmental improvements, but knew she needed more clout before she could speak. At parties, she hung at the edges of conversations, contributed comments that no one bothered to hear. She was in love with the liver, but who wasn't, that dark whale of an organ? You are beautiful and vital, she told herself. They would be lost without you. She wasn't getting any younger. She knew that. She threw herself into the task of harboring digestive bacteria. She harbored impeccably. She harbored with zeal until she harbored the wrong crowd. No one answered her calls to 911. That's just typical, she said, in her first bitter tone. She swelled in self-pity and found comfort in her smarmy new friends. Everyone's got some good in them, she rationalized, making room for a few more. When finally someone noticed, when the harsh light of attention held her in its glare, she capitulated almost violently. "I'll be good," she sobbed. "I didn't mean it," she pleaded. But the handcuffs were already clamped to her wrists. The large intestine pulled back from the commotion, the bad taste. "I knew she'd be dragged off someday," whispered the colon, as her wails faded out in the distance and a thick hush fell over them all. But she's on to a better place, I'm sure. So this is my political poem. I went to the Women's March last January, the first year, and was inspired. I also brought up memories of other women's marches that I'd done in Washington over the year, a long time ago, but that were also very inspiring, and this felt similar. And it is called Women March on Washington All Over the World. We are still in the streets, a glut of protest. We are still stopping the subways, blocking all traffic. We are still in the streets. We've never stopped marching, our arms still uplifted, our signs piercing the sky with words we will live by. We are still in the streets. Our anger is exponentially expanding, a deep ocean current pressing us forward. Our vigilance is unceasing, a many-eyed creature. We are asleep and we are watching. We are still in the streets. Our guttural roar, a tidal wave rushing, a foaming wall growing, erupted from the clap of fear. We are moving across landscapes, a determined respect gathering countless shapes and shades and constructs of love. We are still in the streets. We are a sonic boom of voices. Our words have flown past the atmosphere, collided with the pulsing stars that have changed us. We have changed the shapes of the stars. We mirror the mutinous constellations of peace. We are still in the streets. We are an acceleration of evolution of culture. We are rattling the rusted bars of cages. We are shaking loose the profit from jails, shaking loose the profit from war, shaking loose the profit from the 1%. We are sewing those dollars into inviolate blankets we place over the shoulders of anyone who is cold. We are still in the streets. We are banging the windows, we are shaking the ground, we are vibrating the air, we are pouring out and washing over. We are that force of love and water. We are submerging what is not laced with compassion. We are still in the streets. We are still shouting. You can hear us in the pulse of your blood pumping forward. We are still in the streets of our homes and our jobs and our fields and our alleys and our schools and our woods and our skyscrapers and our mountains. We are plotting and stomping and marching for peace. We are still in the streets. That's it. That's my stack of poems.
That was the great Carol Graser from Albany Poets Presents at Restaurant Navona on February 21st, 2018. Thank you for listening to Next Up to the Mic. We couldn't do it without the very generous supporters of local poetry, writing, and spoken word right here in the Capital District. If you would like to support this and other Hudson Valley Writers Guild projects, please go to hvwg.org/donate. And if you're a business and want to sponsor this podcast, send an email to info@hvwg.org. To find out more about the great poetry, spoken word, and literary community right here in upstate New York, go to www.hvwg.org and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at HV Writers Guild.